Hi, my name is Tyler, and I'm the author of, well, this little collection of short stories. The Chronicles of Feylian are a passion project of mine that I started a while ago and that I can't seem to take my mind off of. So, what we have for today's episode is the creation of the planet, how the dragons came to be, and why the Orks are no longer present on the main continent on this massive planet. Okay, so when this planet was formed, which is almost directly after the Big Bang, this supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy, which you can see in the picture, is actually has some very interesting properties, and this planet somehow managed to form around it, just outside of the reach of the gravitational pull that would pull it into the black hole. Yes, the black hole is still pulling it towards it, but it's just barely fast enough at the edge of that gravitational force that it just so happens that some parts of the laws of nature and physics just don't exist on this planet. Which is how, after a while of this planet existing, after huge meteor showers, we all know how the Earth came to be. And no, I'm not going to go into depth about religion because that would be stupid. I don't want to offend anyone. This is just the facts. So, after a bunch of meteors and comets hit this planet, it eventually started to cool down, and the oceans on it were created, which is when, after billions of years, the first forms of life left the water to, go on land. A bunch of millions of years later, finally, the dragons came to be. At first, they were nothing more but roaring, fire-spitting animals that didn't really know that they were alive. But soon, as the black hole that is basically acting as the sun of this planet by now, because all other stars around it have kind of either fallen into the black hole or have just straight up ceased existing. Because of this physical and radioactive energy, all the gamma radiation, all of that stuff, the dragons started to mutate. Slowly, but they started to mutate. After a while, they were no longer these medium-sized, almost car-sized dragons that could, easily fit into a house. No, they were much bigger now, and the biggest of them was a black dragon that named itself Lucius. Lucius was, at first, a very kind ruler. The dragons started to develop a language, and eventually they learned how to communicate with each other in it. They had no writing system because they didn't need one because of their size. They kind of didn't really have to use one. However, Soon after, rivalries sparked, and Lucius was the only survivor of these battles. He had to kill some of his brothers in this haze of glory. And it was not until way later that he would learn that his actions sparked many, many more life forms to emerge on this planet. So, after the dragons had lived in peace for a while and had sort of, established themselves, something strange started happening. There were rumors about strange creatures moving around, smaller even than Lucius's own palm. However, Lucius wasn't really interested in these small little things the others called orcs. He was more interested in finding a place for his, people to settle. What he landed on was an extinguished supervolcano, a gigantic crater of sorts that was made up of several volcanoes, which had all collapsed into this one gigantic crater. And he landed on this because all of the empty magma chambers inside of this planet's crust were connected and completely empty. There was nothing left in there. So what he did was he laid down in the biggest one, somewhere in the middle of this gigantic cave network. And wouldn't you know, the damn thing had a methane pocket somewhere down there. So he ignited it, which basically led to a gigantic fire that now rages in this cavern, which, of course, due to the gravitational pull and the radiation and physical properties of the black hole, physics and a bunch of other things are, let's say, a bit weird on this planet, meaning he was able to contain this flame within this chamber and seal it off, which in turn slowly heated up the other chambers of this cave network and basically created the perfect home environment for the dragons. Now, this cave system was in a very cold part of the planet, and, well, the orcs didn't really like to go there. So, at first, they were safe. But let's talk about the orcs for a second. The orcs, after appearing from wherever they came from, we have no fossilized evidence of them ever actually appearing, mostly because the time frame is ridiculously long. But because of this, the orcs have kind of always assumed that they sprouted from the corpses of Lucius' brothers, which actually makes sense given that they are obsessed with technology and knowledge and power. 3 traits that Lucius' brothers actually had, which is, in my train of thought, a pretty big red flag. But the dragons ignored it. They taught the orcs how to build machines. The orcs, of course, immediately abused this and started to make war machines. The dragons, disliking this behavior, immediately started to retaliate, not wanting these weapons to be used against them. This sparked a humongous resistance among the orcs. The dwarves come later. Don't worry, we'll explore that tomorrow in episode 2. And during this fight, basically during this rebellion of the orcs, Lucius had to come forth from the supervolcano and face them. What he didn't expect was that the orcs actually had made some kind of a weapon. We don't know what it was or how it functioned. Neither do the orcs, because they did not really have a written language system yet. Yes, they could communicate with each other, but it was basic sign language, and it didn't really work that well. It's not explained in their historical texts how this came to be, except for a singular poem, which I will now read to you. Machines pound, workers spinning screws around. Time moves slow, the charge hums low. Smoke and ash, a worker sweat, working without a safety net. He slips and falls, splash, into the grinding gears of war, as the machine comes to life, a silent killer without strife. What could the orcs want more? This poem is basically the only piece of orc history that has survived up until 5,500 years AWR. This time frame and time system will be explained later. Please be patient. For now, let's focus on why the orcs, sorry. I keep wanting to talk about the dwarves for some reason. Anyway, the orcs eventually used this weapon against Lucius in the field and killed him. However, because none of the other dragons could destroy his skeleton, it remains in the same spot over who knows how long later, because time measurement only really starts after a certain point in time, which is why the AWR short exists. We are currently in, I don't know how many million years BWR. To be honest, probably about 7,000 years, 7,000 BWR. However, this made the dragons hide. They feared that if they were to try to attack the orcs again, that they would face the same fate as their leader. However, this did not happen because the orcs immediately, after realizing the potential of this weapon, immediately also realized that it was a humongous atrocity to use it, because it was basically a one-hit kill and therefore not really what they wanted. I mean, yes, they wanted destruction and death, but not in this way. They never wanted to basically just click a button and bing bang boom, that enemy is spaghetti. No, they did not want that, because that is not how their philosophy functions. After this, the orcs started to develop a language system. They started to develop a written language, and overall their society began to develop into essentially what we would call the early Bronze Age. After that, they basically kept evolving after having built smaller machines for a while. Because, yes, the dragons taught them how to build machines, but they were crude, usually mechanical, made mostly of wood, and not really powerful. The weapon I mentioned that killed Lucius was the first one they ever built that was made of metal, and it was partially forced labor because, yes, they managed to capture some dragons and forced those to heat the metal ore for them because they didn't know yet how to do this themselves. But they eventually figured this out and slowly started to develop over thousands of years until suddenly they were not alone anymore. But that is the story for another day. Stay tuned for episode 2. I'll get this to you whenever I can. Anyway, I'll update you on Instagram or YouTube Shorts. Just keep an eye out. I'll do my best. Anyway, bye bye.